Hello guys, my name is Rizky from Creative All, and in this video, I'm going to give you a glimpse to the behind the scene of video productions. When many of us think about video productions, the first thing that comes to our mind are two things: picking up a camera and shoot, and then edit it. However, there are many other things that actually happen before we even pick up a camera. So in this video, I just want to give you a full workflow of video productions. I do hope that this can be beneficial to anyone who are actually thinking of learning video productions. Probably some of the young guys out there who are thinking of pursuing video productions as a career in the future. Just for context purpose, I've been in the creative industry for about 15 years now, and I've been running my own studio called A Creative All for about 5 years. And I'll be using my passion project called the Fessel series that we launched last year. Yes, we do actually have a dedicated channel for that now. So all of you guys, the horror fans who've been following this channel, you can probably follow that channel as well. I'll be using this particular project as a sample. However, I actually do the same process for all my clients' projects, the corporate videos and advertising projects that we do here at A Creative All. So when at the beginning of the project, some of you guys may have seen behind the scene of your favorite Hollywood movies out there. It's pretty much the same thing, but of course when you're talking about this kind of video productions, it's much scaled down, but the process is pretty much the same, whereby you always have the pre-productions, productions, and post-productions. The first thing that I will come up with is actually to come up with a premise. A premise is basically the summary of the video. This premise can actually be summarized in a couple of sentences. So for example, the Fessel series, the premise of the projects is pretty much a cult with cult members who are trying to populate the earth with alien life forms by breeding them through human. So if you look at like some of your other favorite movies, you probably can summarize the movies into this kind of a short sentences. Therefore, those are actually the premise of the movie. Once I've decided on the premise, the next thing to do is actually to create a 3-act structure. Many of you guys who happens to study filmmaking in school or probably have read a lot of different books on filmmaking, you probably heard about this many times. It's pretty much the template that is being used by filmmakers. You can see this a lot in Hollywood movies, whereby you're actually breaking down the movie into 3 things: intro, problem, and ending. Intro is basically telling the audience what is the story is all about. Problem is basically what is the main goal of the characters in the movie. And of course, ending is basically how the movie will end. By creating this beforehand, you will start to be able to design scenes that are pretty much bringing the story forward. Almost all movies will have these 3 acts. And of course, there are many other variations of it. If you look at like movies like Memento, an example, or the classic Irreversible, the movie actually starts at the ending and goes all the way to the introductions. So you can always start with the 3-act structure first. If you think it will be beneficial for your video, you can jumble up the structure. The next thing to do is actually to write down scenes in a point form format. So by writing down these scenes in a point form format, you will be able to see which are the scenes that is pretty much crucial to the story and which are the scenes that are pretty much an extra, which is sometimes good to have, but if need to, it can be removed. I would be able to start to think about budgeting. This is probably the least interesting part of doing video productions or filmmaking. Regardless what kind of a scale of a project that you're looking for, there are always limited budget. So therefore, once I've decided on the budget, I can look back to my point form scenes, which are the scenes that are crucial and which are the scenes that are not. So once the budget is decided, the next thing that I'm going to do is actually to create something that I call a point form script, basically dividing all the different scenes into point form sentences. I will know exactly what kind of actions that I would have in the video and then translate it into a storyboard later on. If I have a dialogue, if it's a story-based kind of a project like the Fessel series episode 2, I will actually create a script. But if not, just like our typical day-to-day corporate video productions, I will skip into storyboarding. There are many ways to do storyboardings. I do actually have my favorite apps that I can recommend to you guys. I used to do this in 3D format, an example, if I have a bigger project. But most of the time, I will stick to my favorite device, which is the pen and paper. I do believe storyboarding is the one that I will never skip, in regardless what size of projects that I'm actually doing. It helps me a lot in plannings, whereby once you have the storyboards, I know exactly in this particular scenes, in these particular shots, how many people are actually need, how many actors and actresses will there be, how many camera angles, what kind of locations, how many crew members I need, in example, and so on and so forth. Again, this will allows me to relook on the budget one more time. By understanding the whole story with the storyboarding process, let's say I know exactly that I need one actress and one actor. So then we will start to find the talents needed. Beside actors, of course, locations is important. These are the stuff that I will actually book earlier, the actors and the locations, because this will ties in with the production schedule very closely. So an example, let's say I need certain scenes to be shot at these specific locations. I need to be able to book it earlier. Therefore, I know that the locations will be available or not. And I always believe to do things properly. I will never do anything by left because I don't think it's worth the risk. I will actually apply the licenses for relevant parties. An example, in Singapore, whenever we shoot outdoor on the public spaces, most of the time we have to get permissions from LTA, which is basically the regulatory for the traffic. If you happens to shoot in a park, most of the time we need to get permissions from NParks, which is basically the regulatory for parks in Singapore. So this is one thing that you need to check beforehand when you're actually thinking about booking a certain locations, because certain locations are pretty much off limit and you can't actually shoot it. Classic examples is airports. Airports is actually very challenging to shoot. I did a couple of shots for the Changi Airport, Singapore, whereby the client itself are the Changi Airport. However, we need to go through many different licensings and permissions in order for us to be able to shoot inside the airport. So once all of these are confirmed, then of course you start to decide the numbers of the crew that you have, manpowers that you need. Next thing is of course to plan on the equipment. Nowadays, for our day-to-day video productions like our corporate video productions, an example, we have a template of things to bring. So whenever we go to similar projects, we always bring the same thing. So I think that can save a lot of airtime. So we don't need to think about what stuff to bring. We just need to pack and basically go for the shoot. But of course, for a story-based project, sometimes you need something extra. So when we were shooting the Festival series, I was opting to use all the our old vintage Nikon lenses instead of the modern Sony lenses that we normally use in our day-to-day video productions. So therefore, there are some other things that we need to bring in order for us to use that. That is the reason why doing a equipment checklist is important. So therefore, you have all the equipments needed to produce your video. Of course, the next thing that is really important is to have a backup. I always bring at least one camera backup for each of the camera. So an example, let's say I know I need 2 camera angles all the time. If any of the cameras died, I have a replacement for it, and it doesn't affect the production schedule. Because the problem about doing video production is that it's very expensive to actually shoot, because whenever you are on site, there are a lot of people involved who are actually on the clock. Even if you are talking about simple interview video productions, which is typically what we do here at Creative On, there are many people involved, especially the clients. And of course, the last thing that I would want is to make the client waste their times just because of the equipment issue. So therefore, I always bring backups for all of the items that we bring. By having a storyboard, you can plan the productions more efficiently. When we shot the Festival series, the first episodes was pretty straightforward. Everything was done in our tiny office. We just converted one corner to shoot that particular project. For the second episode, it was a little bit more complicated. The first part of the video was actually shot in 3 different locations, while the later part of the video was actually shot in 2 different locations. However, by understanding the storyboards, I know that the first scenes and the last scenes was actually need to be shot in our office. So therefore, I was actually planning to shoot the second scenes and the middle scenes first on the first day, whereby we need to travel to 3 different locations. Then on the second day, we actually shoot the first scene and the last scene. So likewise, you can also use this to plan your equipment. So an example, let's say you need to rent certain equipment. By doing storyboard, you know exactly when you actually need this particular equipment. Next, of course, when you go to editing, and when we are doing our video productions, the mindset is always to shoot more than needed. So during the editing process, you can actually use all of the extra footages to either create a better edits or to fill up problems. Once we have done with the shoot, normally what we do is actually to go back to office, make a copy of all the footages that we shot. I always keep it into 3 different backups. First one is the main one that we are going to edit it from. Second one is for a backup. Last one is on cloud. But of course, cloud space is limited and it's expensive. So normally what I do, I only keep the chosen footages into the cloud. So if one hard drive died, I still have a backup in the second hard drive. Next is of course editing. The first thing that I normally do during editing, to create a separate folder containing all the chosen footages. So normally I will ask one of my colleagues to look through the footages and help me to shortlist the footages. I will use that selected footages and create a simple draft edit based on that. And whenever we are doing editing, the first thing that I do is actually to decide on the song. I always believe that doing a soundtrack based edit is very efficient. Once you have put the soundtrack, you put all the footages on top of the soundtrack and therefore cut it according to the beat of the song. I do actually have a step-by-step tutorial for this, which I think is very beneficial if you are actually starting to learn video productions, especially video editing. Once you have that, you probably have a completed video that is really rough, and then you can start to use that as a guide and to edit it further. Whether you want to shorten certain parts, whether you want to start to do your color grading process, whether you want to start adding visual effects if needed, and so on and so forth. Next thing, once all the editings has been completed, the thing that I always like to do is actually to have a second pair of eyes to see the edits. This is something that is really hard in my opinion, is to decide when the editing can end. Whenever I work on my own passion projects like the Vessel series, it's always been very challenging because I keep second guessing myself. I keep want to relook at it. I want to change the color grading. If I were to follow that, it will never stop and I will never be able to complete the project. And it's totally different with client's project because normally the client is basically the boss. For client's projects, what we normally do is basically we do the best edit that we can within a given deadline, send it to the client and let the clients to approve and comment further. And of course, it will go through multiple different revisions based on the client's preferences. But in passion projects, it's very hard. There are basically 2 things that I do to fix this issue. The first thing is to give myself a deadline. Even if it's a passion project that pretty much nobody actually pressure you to finish it, give yourself a deadline. I always mention it in my YouTube channel when I will actually complete the project. For example, prior to launching the Vessel series, I was actually telling everyone that I'm going to launch it during Halloween 2021, which I did. By doing so, I have a time limit that I need to fulfill and therefore I can actually plan my schedule based on that. Next is to have a second pair of eyes. Once this kind of a project is completed, I always send it to a person that I trust that has a good eyes, that doesn't actually personally involved in the project. I was fortunate to have my good old friend Iqbal, who when we shot our passion project, he wasn't actually shooting it. He has an unbiased opinion from it. And I will send it to him to get a second opinion. So when you're working on passion projects, ideally you have a dedicated target audience that you can actually send your projects to and ask them to comment on it. Therefore, you can edit it further. In fact, this is what they do in the larger productions, like big budget Hollywood movies, an example. They will actually show the movies into test group before they actually launch the movie. So I'm not going to dive too deep in this particular video, but I hope it can give you a bit of a glimpse of the entire video production process. And I'm going to create a dedicated tutorials for each of the topics I mentioned in this video. Some of you guys who are basically new in the video production line, or some of you young guys who are thinking of doing this as a career in the future, can actually benefit from this. I hope this video is useful. It's just a small channel, so I do believe I will have the time to actually respond, to look through and respond all the questions. If you want to connect with me, the best method is actually to find me on LinkedIn. If you want to see my behind the scene daily, you can actually find me on Instagram. So with that, thank you so much for watching and I see you next time.